what the printing press does is it serves as the means of disseminating information. Just like most of you will be too young to remember, but there was a time before the internet when if we wanted to send someone a message, we either telephoned them or sent them a letter, right? Now we can move that information instantly at the click of a button by sending an email. The same is true of the printing press to a lesser degree, right? We went from having to copy something out by hand, where only very few educated people could write, to being able to take an idea and share it thousands of times through using this printing press. This allows Luther's 95 Theses to be disseminated, right? Luther's 95 Theses are critiques of the Catholic Church, right? This guy, Martin Luther, nails them up to the door of the church in Wittenberg. Putting things on the door of the church, by the way, is not that's not like it would be today. That's not like walking up to your local church or wherever you do or don't go to worship. It is like pinning something on a notice board, right? So the idea of him pinning the things on the door of the church has been sort of blown out of proportion as a rebellious act. That itself was not a rebellious act. But the thing that he said hugely undermined the Catholic Church, right? It attacks all these specific practices they have, the most important one being the sale of indulgences, which effectively allows someone with enough money to buy a pardon for any sins that they might commit. So what that means is you can get away with doing something wrong and still go to heaven so long as you come and pay a priest enough money, and then your sins, your bad actions are forgiven, right? And then the last thing is the mercantile revolution, this beginning of what we see as proto-capitalism, right? Of instead of working on the fields in return for the right to grow your own food, working, making things, selling those things, and using that money to buy food. Okay, so here is Gutenberg, right? This guy who develops the printing press. He develops this press with movable type, oil-based ink, adjustable molds, and a wooden frame. What that means is you're basically sliding little wood blocks into a jig and stamping them down. And by doing that, you're able to make words on a script, or make words out of the blocks, and then make sentences out of the words, and then books out of the sentences. And you can dip these words in ink and stamp them onto as many different pieces of paper as you want, right? Way quicker than having a monk write it out for you. His first major thing that he did was to print and share the Bible, right? Within 50 years of the invention of the Gutenberg press, there were 1,000 printing presses. So this technology really took off. What it increasingly does is it bolsters the middle class, that is the people who are making money from making things, and undermines the church. If everyone has a Bible, they can call the church out when they're saying stuff which may or may not be supported by the Bible, right? We also see an increase in vulgar languages and a decrease in Latin, right? Latin had a status because it was the language of education. It was through Latin that we could access knowledge, right? When Latin was the written and read language, it was through Latin that we could encounter the knowledge of the rest of the world. Right? Now, with the printing press, we can print in our own languages, and we don't need to know Latin to encounter the knowledge of the rest of the world. It's also the beginning of a science community. So we spoke about the scientific method, right? This idea that you have an idea, you test it, and then when you're done with your proof of it, you have someone else do it. This is what the printing press does, right? You can say, this is my theory, I tested it, this is the results I got, see if you can replicate them. And this is what we do with academic journals, right? So let's look at some of these graphics quickly. This is the rate of literacy, right? So we see that the number of literate people and the percentage of people who are literate both increase incredibly rapidly, right? As we start about the time period, get it up to, I think it takes us up to 1920, yeah. And the printing press coming along causes this increased spike, right? Both in the number of people who are literate and in the percentage of people who are literate. This is the amount of authors by year, right? This is an interesting statistic. As I said before, writing was very hard. It's very expensive to learn how to write. It required dedicating much of your time, energy, and money to learning how to write. What has happened since then is that writing and sharing your ideas has become easier and easier and easier, thanks to the advent of the printing press, right? So we see this sharp rise and a gradual rise, right, as technology allows more and more people to write more and more things. 1900, right, we start seeing typewriters. Eventually, we're going to see computers, and then boom, what happens here? It's the internet, right? The internet gives us all a means to share with the world our ideas, our thoughts, to write them down and publish them somewhere where someone else can read them. But before Gutenberg, the only way to do that was either to spend years learning how to write yourself, or to go and contract a scribe to do your writing for you. Okay. The Ottoman Empire had developed printing earlier, but maybe correctly had realized that it was going to be very dangerous for their claim on authoritarian power, and so they banned printing, right? It was printing as much as anything else that allowed the Reformation, that allowed these massive changes that happen in the church, right? Protestants, including Martin Luther, based their critiques of the church on their idea that everybody has a right to read the Bible, and that the Bible and not the church has authority, right? So they're challenging these practices like selling indulgences based on the Bible because they now have access to the Bible because of the printing press. Luther, in the first decade of the Reformation, publishes 6 to 7 million pamphlets, right? That's a huge number when we consider that there had not been a printing press just decades before, right? More than a quarter of them were published by this one guy, Martin Luther. So he is the sort of first best-selling author, I guess. And we can see some examples of early printed pamphlets here. So printing also has this link to democracy, right? It is things like the Peasants' War in Germany, and Thomas Paine in the Americas. Here is the Peasants' War, right? It draws on the language and style of Luther. This idea of, I can write a pamphlet, and this pamphlet can maybe change the world if enough people read it, is ingrained in us now, right? We all understand the idea of a manifesto, the power of an idea. But for an idea to have power, it has to be an idea that we can share. And that is not something that existed before we could share ideas easily with the printing press. Okay, so those are the major ideas for this week. I'm going to go back and re-record the middle section now because you guys will have missed it. But if anyone has any questions, post them on the message board. I hope this helps you to understand a little bit of your assignment for this week and your discussions for this week. And you can find this all linked in the week 1B and week 1A. Week 1A was the first lecture, week 1B is the second lecture.